Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Delve. Today we continue to beat the heat by working on our water gun combat game. Now last time we added even more variation to our game by creating randomly generated terrain for our water fights. Along with that generator came a new controller object that would keep track of everything going on in our world. There were a few hiccups, most due to GameMaker's updated tile system, but we still managed to accomplish our goal of creating randomly generated goodness. Today we kind of continue to focus on the random generation, as we implement spawns for other aspects of our game. We'll figure out a system to not only spawn in our water spouts, but also our enemies. And if we're lucky, no more drastic changes to GameMaker's inner workings will prevent us from accomplishing today's goals. So fingers crossed and let's get to the coding. Between videos I have continued working on the game, most notably are the props of trees and rocks that now spawn on our islands. I did this off video partly as a test to avoid issues like in the last episode. I've also improved the visuals so more of the important elements stand out better. And the most important thing I've worked on was optimization. I did just about everything I could think to improve performance and managed to double the average frame rate we had last time. But as far as I can tell, our awesome spray effect will always have to be a heavy load. Anyway, back to our regularly scheduled episode. First up were the water spouts. I set up an array that would mark several floor tiles at random as potential spawn points for our water spouts. I then had these spouts decide their replacement's position on depletion. I figured fixed spots for spouts would make for a less stressful experience. And while the player still has to initially see them spawn in the world, I think the safety net of making minor mental notes of general locations is much less stressful than not knowing where any could spawn at all. Next up was the enemy spawner, and much like everything else, enemy spawners choose a random edge of the island. And to make sure spawns weren't actually in walls, I added collision checks that would push spawners out to free areas. The resulting behavior was a little odd, but I continued forward anyway. I added an alarm, and in the alarm I checked for the player position. Using this, I then tried to determine the nearest open space the enemy could spawn. The idea being that the enemy would start in the water and hop to shore. The results were solid, but because of the weird spawner positions, enemies weren't spawning correctly. Then it dawned on me, the collision code was constant, which explains the spawners sometimes ending up in really weird positions. Tweaking the code so that wasn't the case fixed our enemy spawn issues for the most part. Now, I wanted to make the enemy spawns more interesting, which will require some new art, but that doesn't mean we still can't code a better entrance. And instead of adding yet more things to spawn in, I decided to try making a fancier entrance with just our spawner object. Using timers and our favorite, the switch function, I built a state-based sequence that would make up our enemy entrances. The initial state would count down to the beginning of the entrance, while also noting down the important information we'll need for later in the sequence. The next state would be our motion state, moving our spawner to its destination and switching to our final state. The final state spawns the enemy and the spawner destroys itself. A few added effects will accompany this sequence once I've done the art, but that's the general breakdown. And oddly enough, I had some trouble with the moving state. Motion set and the other of my usual go-to methods resulted in some funky behavior, so instead I literally moved the spawners by their X and Y positions over to their destinations, and once close enough I had it initiate the final state. But despite the weird hangups we had there, I was able to get a working system of spawners spawning, going through their sequence, and creating enemies at the end. Very bare, but we'll come back to it. Now that we had our spawns and spawners working, we had to control how many were created at a time. Originally, I wanted to keep track of enemy counts and have the world controller spawn them at certain amounts. But that resulted in some kind of error and, well, yeah. Honestly, the most amazing thing about this site is the fact that we don't even come close to dropping below 60 frames, despite all the on-screen chaos. And as much as I'd like to keep that chaos going, we sadly had to figure out an alternative. So instead, I did what I did with the water spouts and had the enemies spawn their replacement upon destruction. That way there were no mix-ups when it came to numbers. Well, hopefully. And the end result was a self-sustaining system of constantly spawning spouts and enemies. It's not perfect, but I think the few spawn errors I've seen thus far can be easily fixed with better generation parameters. Overall, I am liking the state of the game, and after seeing how stable it was amidst the utter accidental chaos from earlier, my morale for the game's performance is at an all-time high. So let's end things on a positive note for this episode of Let's Delve. So remember that if you like this video or enjoy Let's Dev in general, be sure to hit that like button. If you aren't already subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button and be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. And as always, be sure to leave your thoughts on our progress in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.